Okay, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. How are y'all? Good. Very good. We just have to clap. We've been together, some of us, for 3 days now. Welcome to 5030, From War to Peace in Vietnam and the United States. So today's events, the one that you're here for right now, this panel is called Conversations Left Unsettled, Healing the Wounds of War in Vietnam through the Arts. I am Lien Hang Thi Nguyen. I'm the Dorothy Borg Associate Professor in the History of the United States and East Asia, the director of the Weatherhead East Asian Institute, and co-founder along with John Phan, come wave, of Global Vietnam Studies. So welcome today. We're so excited to have you. So I just want to, before I begin, I want to first actually thank our co-sponsors, the School of the Arts, as well as the Weatherhead East Asian Institute staff. I really, since this is the final day, please give them a round of applause for everything, particularly Hiba. So the Weatherhead East Asian Institute was founded in 1949, and we began with the focus on China, Japan, and Korea, so Northeast Asia, and we promote the study, the research, and the teaching about all things Asia. Since our focus on Northeast Asia, we've expanded into Inner Asia, including Mongolia, and our recent expansion, our recent foray has been in Southeast Asia, and in particular, Vietnam studies, which of course, as you know, is near and dear to my heart. Within Global Vietnam Studies, I'm offering a course, which is really, I think, in many ways, the genesis of this event. That's History 244, the Vietnam War, special 50th anniversary edition, and many of the students are here and have been here for the past 2 days. And we've just had, sort of this ongoing conversation about the war in Vietnam and, of course, the reconciliation process. So these events are a culmination of a semester-long course that we've looked at the war, its history, and then, of course, reconciliation. So today's really special because it really profiles one of our co-organizers of this event, and that is Tony Bui. Tony Bui is a Sundance award-winning filmmaker and currently serves as the Weatherhead East Asian Institute's artist in residence at Columbia at my institute. His debut film, 3 Seasons, won the Grand Jury Prize, Audience Award, and Best Cinematography at the Sundance Film Festival, and was Vietnam's official Oscar entry in that year that it came out in 1999. In 2024, the film was honored as one of the 10 landmark works selected to celebrate Sundance 40th anniversary, and it was the only one that focused on Asia by an Asian American. And we have a very special relationship with this film because the Institute helped restore and remaster this amazing, brilliant film. And for any of you who are still here on Sunday, it will be screened at the Asia Society and will be followed by a conversation between me and Tony Bui. In 2025, he curated a groundbreaking Criterion Channel program showcasing American and Vietnamese films for the 50th anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War. His upcoming feature is inspired by the iconic Pulitzer Prize-winning Napalm Girl photograph. But I think one of the most amazing things about Tony, and I've said this to him many times, that he loomed very large in my imagination when I first saw 3 Seasons, which I'm not joking, changed my life. It just inspired me to work on Vietnam and to try to create something beautiful like he did with 3 Seasons. I wrote a book, Hanoi's War. I would not call it beautiful, but it is something, it's my testament to Vietnam and its history inspired by Tony's film. And so when he became our artist in residence, I was expecting him to be this really, sort of difficult, mean director, and he's not. He is a prince of a man and a very good friend. So with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Tony Bui.
She actually left out a small part. She said when she met me, she felt actually let down, from the original film. She was like, I was so inspired by the film, I met you, and I was like, darn. But thank you all for coming. I know it's a Friday afternoon, it's finals week. I know for a lot of you guys are, neck deep in exams, writing your final papers, including for my class. So thank you for attending. I know it's a busy time here at Columbia. On the occasion of this 50th anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War, it is a deep honor to welcome you all today for Conversations Left Unsettled, hosted here at Columbia University's Weatherhead East Asian Institute, but also part of a program that is toured across the country by Vietnam Week, with the wonderful Aaron Steinhauer and Peter Steinhauer. 50 years is both a long time and no time at all. For many, the war is a closed chapter, a historical event marked by textbooks and anniversaries. But for others, especially those in this room, it remains a living memory, one that continues to echo through families, communities, and generations. Today, we come together not just to revisit the past, but to explore how it lives within us, and how the arts can serve as a vessel for healing, understanding, and transformation. This conversation today is not just about rehashing old wounds, but about examining what we've inherited from them, and how we can carry those legacies forward with compassion, dignity, and clarity. Our theme this evening, Inheriting the Past, Fostering Hope for the Future, is both a responsibility and a creative invitation. How do we take the weight of history and shape it into something meaningful for our children and our communities? How do we use stories and language and images to bridge divides and to imagine a future where reconciliation is not only possible, but necessary? Art, in its many forms, allows us to do this. It lets us hold contradictions of pain and beauty, trauma, and transcendence within the same frame. It offers space to grieve, but also to dream. And most importantly, it invites dialogue between generations, between countries, and between people who may never otherwise meet. This will be our conversation today, a shared space for reflection, but also an invitation for openness and curiosity. And most importantly, the understanding that healing is not linear. It is layered, unresolved, and often unfinished. Thank you. I have the great honor of bringing up our first guest. Born and raised in Vietnam, Nguyễn Phan Quế Mai is the author of 13 books in Vietnamese and English, most recently the worldwide best-selling novels The Mountain Sings and Dust Child, and the forthcoming poetry book, The Color of Peace. Her writing has been translated into more than 25 languages and has received the Penn Oakland Josephine Miles Literary Award, the International Book Award, the Book Browse Desk Debut Award, and the Lannan Literary Fellowship in Fiction, as well as runner-up for the Dayton Literary Peace Prize. She was named by Forbes Vietnam as one of the 20 inspiring women of 2021. She has a PhD in creative writing from Lancaster University in the United Kingdom. Please help me welcome Quế Mai.
Gian bếp của mẹ. Qua đôi mắt tuổi thơ tôi nhìn mẹ tôi tất tả trong gian bếp được dựng lên bằng rơm và bùn quánh. Mẹ nhấc đũa lên quấy nắng vào nồi cơm đang sôi. Vạt áo mẹ đậm hương thơm của mùa gặt mới tay mẹ mớm rơm khô cho ngọn lửa đói bập bùng. Tôi muốn đến cạnh bên và giúp mẹ, nhưng đứa trẻ trong tôi kéo tôi chui vào góc bếp tới thẳm. Từ nơi đó tôi nhìn gương mặt mẹ dạy vẻ đẹp cách bừng lên trong gian khổ và cách hát cho cơm sôi bằng đôi tay rám nắng của người. Ngày hôm đó trong gian bếp của tuổi thơ tôi, sự hoàn hảo được sắp đặt bằng những chiếc nồi đen tuyền bồ hông, và bởi chiếc lưng khom của mẹ mỏng manh trông chân sẽ biến mất nếu tôi khóc hay kêu lên. My mother's rise. Through the eyes of my childhood, I watched my mother, who labored in a kitchen built from straw and mud. She lifted a pair of chopsticks and twirled sunlight into a pot of boiling rice. The perfume of a new harvest soaked her worn shirt as she bent and fed rice straws to the hungry flames. I wanted to come and help, but the child in me pulled myself into a dark corner where I could watch my mother teach Beauty how to glow in hardship and how to sing the rice to cook with her sun-baked hands. That day in our kitchen, I saw how perfection was arranged by soot-blackened pan and pot, and by the bent back of my mother, so thin she would disappear if I wept or cried out. Thank you so much. Hello, New York. How are you today? I spoke to my mom, and she couldn't believe that I was here, and she wished she could be here too because she wanted to meet one of her star film actresses, actress Kiều Trinh. Cô ơi, cô đứng lên. I want to introduce cô Kiều Trinh. Can you guess how old she is? Sorry, we don't normally talk about age, but I need to talk about this incredible person's age.
Only 88.
88 years old, can you believe? I mean, and she is still traveling and making films and making such significant contributions to art and literature and films. So thank you so much, cô.
Thank you.
And cô Kiều Trinh also wrote a brilliant memoir. Can you tell us a little bit about your memoir? Because this memoir is a testament of survival.
Phan Quế Mai, I'm not a writer like you. So my memoir is just like the fact, the journey of my life, what I have went through, the 3 wars, from the Second World War to the French Indochina War in North Vietnam, divided my country into 2 parts, North and South, and then the end of the Vietnam War in 1975. So I became refugee 3 times in my life. And we're very lucky that I was sponsored by the famous, beloved actress Tippi Hedren, who sponsored me into the United States and helped me to get back to my career. So I'm now working in the film industry still.
Wow, bravo. And please read her memoir because it's incredible. Cảm ơn cô nhiều. And watch her films as well. Cảm ơn cô.
One of my film now is showing on Apple TV. It's called Dope Thief by Sir Ridley Scott and Peter Craig. It is showing on the Apple TV. Yes, every Friday.
Wow, please watch it. Cảm ơn cô nhiều. Thank you.
That was lovely. Thank you so much, Quế Mai. Thank you, Go Kiều Trinh. I'd like to bring up our second guest. Peter Steinhauer is an artist photographer who lived and worked in Asia for 20 years, beginning in Vietnam in 1993. His photography focuses on architecture with urban landscape, man-made structure, and natural landscape. His prints are in collections in the Carnegie Museum of Art, the Hong Kong Heritage Museum, and a growing number of private and corporate collections worldwide. He is a recipient of the numerous International Photography Awards, including being named a finalist for the 2014 and the 2017 Lucy Awards, a Ford Foundation grant for his multi-year work in Vietnam, 3 Communication Arts Photography Annual Award of Excellence Awards, among others. Steinhauer's Enduring Spirit of Vietnam was awarded Best Photography Book of the Year in 2007 by Photo District News. Please join me in welcoming Peter Steinhauer.
Hello, everyone. Great. Thank you, everyone, for coming out today on your Friday afternoon here. This is where my Vietnam started. I was 1.5 years old, and this is the first second I saw my father, who was in the Marines in Da Nang in 1966-67 as a Marine doctor. And he served there for 1.5 years. And these are my 2 older sisters here along with him. I was born 2 weeks after he left. I have a huge family history with Vietnam. Vietnam has been in my life since I can remember. My father obviously being there. I have an uncle who's on the wall, in the memorial wall in D.C. He was a pilot. He was shot down, and he was missing for 26 years. They found him in Laos, I think in the early 90s, found his airplane there. My younger brother, was born without an esophagus, and it was from the exposure that my father had from Agent Orange on the military base where he was. And just growing up, my father also we had slideshows in our living room every year of his thousands of slides that he took. Obviously he had to photograph everyone for record on the table, but he also went out on the weekends where they would hire mostly women from the barracks or from the surrounding villages to help clean the barracks and the base. And he would always joke around with them and so on. So on the weekends, he would give back to them and go out and clean teeth and fix cleft lips and so on, while other doctors were there too, just to give back. And he would make all these photographs. And so we would have these slideshows in our living room 3-4 times a year, which had a huge impact on me growing up. And then in the late 80s, he helped start a health organization. It was 1989. He went back to Vietnam for the first time, and he helped found a health organization that gives donated medical equipment from the U.S. to hospitals in Vietnam, and taking doctors from Vietnam, bringing them over to the U.S. and observing surgery, and they would be living with us, and that was in the early 90s. Also, I'd forgotten to mention, in the 70s, growing up, 71, 72, 73, we had Vietnamese exchange students from Saigon who would go to the University of Colorado. I'm from Boulder, Colorado. And they would be living with us. So I had Vietnamese students living with us when I was 7, 8, 9 years old. They're living in our house. So then I finally had a chance to go over in 1993 after I finished art school. And as soon as I landed, it was like I had felt like my entire life had prepared me to be where I was, and that I had, very strange, I felt like I was home, and I was supposed to be there. And so I stayed there in Hanoi, and then I will be speaking about the rest of my work throughout the rest of the talk. But thank you, that's a big background on me.
All right, let's jump into this. I'm excited for this conversation. And then I'm going to open it up just for the format, you guys know, for the last 20 minutes, we'll open it up for Q&A from the audience. So get your questions ready. I want to start with you, Quế Mai. We always, even in my own class, I talk about how every story there's a beginning, and every present there's a past. So let's start there. Talk to us a little bit about how you began your early works, and then we'll build up to where you're at today.
Thank you so much, Tony. It's such an honor to be in conversation with you. I've admired your work so much. I love so many of your films. The 3 seasons, very amazing. And, Ambassador Osio said today that it's so poetic. It's like a poem. So how many of you have watched Tony's film? Raise your hands.
Go ahead and lie.
Wow. Most people have watched your film, see? So thank you so much for your contribution to our culture. So, I grew up during the American trade. I was born, during the Vietnam War in North Vietnam. And when I was 6 years old, I moved to South Vietnam. And life was very difficult when I was growing up. But the poet Phùng Quán wrote this: có những phút ngã lòng tôi vịnh câu thơ và đứng dậy. In moments of difficulty, I hold on to the verse of poetry to pull myself up. So poetry was really the pillar of my life when I was growing up, because my mom read to me a lot of poetry, and I heard poetry on the national radio. So I fell in love with poetry, and I started writing poetry when on the motorbike. This is something I don't advise you to do, because I did get caught by the police many times. But my very first poems were written on my motorbike when I was, living in Hanoi, because my family did not want me to become a writer. So I went on to study business. I was one of the first investors in the Vietnamese stock exchange. But when I started writing poetry on that motorbike, I left my account. It's still there, and I haven't touched it. But sometimes, as a poet, you kind of dream you are above the clouds. But I went on to publish my first poetry collections, and then I wrote prose as well. And I love poetry so much that I started translating, Vietnamese poetry into English. And I want to acknowledge some, the incredible help of many incredible writers as well. And in this room, one of my friends, Jennifer Fossenbell. Jennifer, where are you? Yes, Jennifer is here. Jennifer lived in Hanoi many years, and she volunteered her time to translate with me many poems from incredible Vietnamese poets, because we wanted to document Vietnam beyond the wall. We wanted to show, Vietnam as a country of more than 4,000 years of history and culture. So, because when I was translating poetry, and then I thought, okay, I should translate my own poems. So I had my very first, you can see here on this screen, The Human Field was translated by Jennifer and myself, as well as White Under the Sky. And Jennifer and I worked many years on it. And after I translated my poetry, and I was looking for a novel to translate, and then I was thinking, okay, not many people buy poetry books unless you write poetry like Ocean Vuong. So I wanted to translate a novel until I told myself, why don't I write this novel myself? So that began a very crazy journey. So that's my poetry book. And then the next journey was to write my novels. And this New York is where my dream began. My novels, The Mountain Sing and Dust Child, was published by an incredible person, Betsy Click, and she's here today. Betsy. Betsy, thank you so much. Betsy took a great risk of publishing an unknown writer from Vietnam. And I had an incredible time with her, with both of my novels. So The Mountain Sing, with The Mountain Sing, it took me 7 years to write, and I could not find an agent. And then, when the world tells you no, what do? You keep fighting, right? So I went on and write Dust Child. And I was desperate because I quit my full-time job, stay home, and try to become a writer. And there were moments of desperation, but I kept fighting because I thought there were stories that needed to be told. And the Vietnamese proverb says, "Trong cái rủi có cái may." Good luck hides inside bad luck. The bad luck was that I couldn't find an agent, but when I could find my agent, Julie Stephenson, I had 2 manuscripts. So I was working on Dust Child when she sold The Mountain Sing to Betsy, and then Betsy went on to publish both of my novels. So thank you very much, Betsy. And as an artist, I want to grow, I want to learn. So then I have gone on to do a crazy thing. I attempted to write poetry in English, and I don't really know the rules of poetry in English, but these are my heart songs. So this poetry collection commemorates the 50th anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War. And even though the war ended 50 years ago, there are still millions of people who are living with the impact of Agent Orange. For example, children are still being born deformed by Agent Orange. There are still children being killed by unexploded ordinances, million pieces of which are still buried in the soil of Vietnam. So that's why I'm donating 100% proceeds of this book to 3 organizations that are doing incredible work in supporting victims of Agent Orange and victims of unexploded bombs. And I could call on your support of these 3 organizations: Peace Trees Vietnam, the Dove Fund, and Renew. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you the same question, Peter, in a second, but I want to follow up because you touched upon something that I think is really important. I don't want to quickly jump through it, but you talked about, you started out as translating the works of other people, and then you said, well, why am I doing that? I can do it myself. I think we just touched upon something that's very difficult for a lot of artists and just people in general, and I talk to my students about this, and that is finding your voice. And how did you go from really translating other people's voices to saying, look, I have a voice, and it means something. Was there a moment was there a tipping point for you? Can you talk to us about that?
Yes, I was a writer first before I became a translator. And being a translator taught me a lot of things. It taught me how to create within certain boundaries because, I believe a literary translator is an artist. You give new life to a work of literature, but within the framework of the original work. So it was quite challenging. So I think it's easier to write than to translate. But I learned a lot. I learned a lot about the layers and complexity of languages and how to play with the language. And it gave me more confidence to write in English. But I did learn a lot. And there is one thing which is lacking in Vietnam, which is, training programs in literary translations. Because translators get paid so little in Vietnam. We can't earn our living.
Same here as well.
Same here. So more investment in translations, please. So that's why, so I wish I had more training, but I learned a lot by doing the work.
Yeah, fantastic. Peter, tell us how you got started in your early works and take us through your journey.
Great. These are three of my Vietnamese books on Vietnam, and I have a few more that are projects that are finished. And but these are the first one here is on the left-hand side. It's called Vietnam Portraits and Landscapes, and that is when I a bit about that. It's actually what it says. It's portraits and landscapes, but it's something that through these slides that I'd had from my father's slideshows growing up, that I just had this envisioned this, what the landscapes would look like, and it would just seem like such this foreign place, but I loved seeing all of these photographs. And so I went through and I just came up with this idea by the time I formulated it I wanted to photograph landscapes from all over the country to show what Vietnam actually looked like. But the portraits were also going to be something that as a kid, I always wanted to see inside people's living and working environments, because all the photographs, were always, usually they were from the war, they were usually outside, journalistic style. They're great photographs, but I had always wanted to see inside. And so this is one of the images here from my first book, and these subsequent ones are from following on. The second one was just as I had gone through and was living in Vietnam for about 5 years. Then I started my second book, which accompanies, it's 4 different bodies of work inside, which is the Mekong Delta, the canals of Saigon, ethnic minorities, and the streets, roofs, and houses of Hanoi, which I was able to document while I was living there. And then my third book that I just come out with, which is, it's called Spires, and that is on there are a tremendous amount of Catholic cathedrals throughout Vietnam, but one section is in the Red River Delta, which is south of Hanoi, about 100 miles, 150 kilometers, and it's 4 provinces just filled with around 2,000 cathedrals like this. And they were built by the French, they were built by Vietnamese, actually, and the architects were French. Vietnamese materials, and they were built, anywhere, the oldest ones are around 250 years old. So they've been, I first saw them 32 years ago, and they are being dismantled and to make way for modernism, or some of them need upkeep. And so part of my work, I've been inspired by 19th century photographers my whole career, and one in particular, Eugene Atget, and he documented Paris in the late 1800s. And today, his work is a national treasure for France, and documenting Paris that no one else was. It was only 30-something years, 40 years after the invention of photography. So his work is really, really important, and I found myself doing that throughout all of the bodies of my work, knowing that Vietnam was changing so much and going towards modernism, opening up. I lived there 2.5 years before the U.S. embargo lifted. So I saw the change as I was living there all the time. And it was super important to me to take my influences and try to, in homage to them, try to emulate what they were going to do, because I wanted to make it, of course, for my work as an artist, but also I wanted to do this for Vietnam and to have this as national treasures for Vietnam, and to one day, hopefully, my work shine out like Adjunkt's work is for France, that mine would be the same for Vietnam.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you, Peter. I just want to do a quick follow-up. Because Peter and I, we started with sort of our creative journey to get, around the same time in the 90s, are the place where we really found ourselves and were inspired, and we gravitated towards, back to again and again, was Vietnam. And I get asked this a lot as a filmmaker, but I ask you as a photographer, and there's a lot of similarities to what we do, right? What you do has a lot of similarities to Quế Mai, because photography is it's like poetry. But what you do is also you're telling stories like me. But in your early days coming to Vietnam, was there a specific location, image, a moment that made you go, like, this is where you want to spend so much time photographing? Do you remember, like, a specific spot? Was there an early memory that had such a influential impact on you?
Yeah, for sure. There's early on, and it's still that way. And in fact, it's interesting you saying this, because this is my next book that is almost finished. It's in an area, it's in the north. Geographically, it's the northeast of Vietnam, and it's this place right here called Ha Long Bay. And it's 1,500 square kilometers of these islands. And it's like a labyrinth inside. And during different times of the year, the different seasons, the light is different. Sometimes it's completely foggy and so on. And other times heavy storm clouds in the summer. And I continuously go back to this place all the time. I feel like really, really at home in this
yeah, it's a
area
magical
here.
place. For anyone who's never been there, it's incredible. Definitely have to check it out. Quế Mai, we talked about your early work. We haven't talked about your early part of your life, though. Please talk to us a little bit about your childhood and how did that influence you as an artist and as a poet?
Before I answer your question, I want to say that I really appreciate, the effort of international artists who document Vietnam beyond the war. And you see these pictures from Peter, but I met him in Vietnam when he was there to take those pictures. And he was like speaking Vietnamese fluently. And he can make really bad jokes in Vietnamese too. And I'm encouraging him to write this book. It's called, what is the title again?
I haven't come up with the title yet.
But like the dirty jokes about Vietnam.
Stories that have happened.
But Peter really travel around in Vietnam with a motorbike, and he had an accident that nearly killed him. And he was he had so many operations, and he was hospitalized for more than a month. But he went back to the States, and then I asked him, did you have hesitation of returning to Vietnam? He said, no. He returned as soon as he covered, and he rode the street where he had the accident to try and see why it happened. But it's incredible. So thank you, Peter. So for me, I became a writer because I love reading. I wanted to see myself in books. When I grew up, we had nothing, but my parents put in all their savings into buying books for me, and I read a lot of banned books. Banned books really opened my eyes and helped me, kind of think differently. And I dreamed of being a writer at that time. And I mean, in the 80s, when things were really difficult and Vietnam started to open up, then we lost our home, and at that time I was so ashamed of being poor. But then when I had a good book, I thought, okay, as long as you have a book, you don't have to be poor. You are not poor because you can live another life. You can dream. So with this picture, I want to say that when I was growing up in the 80s in Vietnam, some of my classmates would disappear from my class. And they did not tell us where they would go. And later on, I would know that they had become boat people. And I would like to read a poem from my collection, The Color of Peace, about that time. Boatland. I am 12, growing up in Bạc Liêu, a tiny town dangling on the southern tip of the Mekong Delta, where sometimes a classmate disappears. Uyên has gone out to sea with her family on a boat. Someone whispers, none of us are supposed to know, so everyone is robbed of a chance for a proper goodbye before the waves tower above those courageous enough to abandon the land fragrant with the spirits of our ancestors. At night, my eldest brother tunes our broken radio to catch the news broadcast by the Voice of America radio in Vietnamese. My mother lingers by the window in case someone approaches our hut. It is forbidden for us to listen to news from America, but we must know. I put my head next to my brothers to hear the radio's broadcast about boats lost at sea or captured by pirates who raped the women and threw the bodies of children overboard. I don't know what to think. I see Uyên laughing the last time we played hopscotch on the dirt surface of our schoolyard. Before that, she had emptied the tears from her eyes onto my shirt because her father's factory had been nationalized, taken away, so there would be no capitalist among us. I am 12 and I don't understand why our country is being pulled apart, her arms and legs chopped off by the sea. To be Vietnamese is to carry holes inside of us, holes in the shape of boats.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much. That was really touching. Peter, I want to ask you the same question, but I want to be a little more specific with you because I know a little bit about your history and your past. I want to ask you about your childhood, but you did something very specific with your work. You know, your father, as you mentioned earlier, served in the Vietnam War. You grew up in America, and obviously your introduction to Vietnam from your childhood was through the lens of war. But distinctly, your work avoids the war. Please talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. It's actually quite a simple and easy answer. You know, doctors, what I learned, and I learned it from viewing slides. Again, I continuously go back to these slideshows of my father's. And also the words from my dad was, you know, his job was like he had to deal with the result of war. That's what doctors do. They fix the result of war. And he was in the center of the country where there was a tremendous amount of fighting. And on the base, they would have North Vietnamese prisoners, and there would be Southern Vietnamese who were coming in onto the tables, and he was working on both of them, just trying to save lives and so on. And to him, he couldn't see the difference, and of course, but he just became very jaded with it. But he saw his job was just fixing, it was the result of war. And so me growing up with all of these slides, it was actually quite easy. When I left, I was like, everything about Vietnam that I knew was war. And I had seen real slides, when I asked my father, he'd taken, I think we had something around 20,000 slides that we had at our house. And occasionally when I got older, I was trying to be tough, and I want to see, the real stuff. And he was like, "You sure you want to see that?" So when I saw the real stuff of people on tables, it's just, films, you can't see, it's nothing does justice to it. And so early on, then later on, learning the history of Vietnam and knowing how many thousands of years old this country and the culture is, as I got older and became an artist, I said, when I'm going there, I want to focus on the beauty of this. I want to show something that has nothing to do with the war. And in fact, that became my one rule that I had, and I actually wrote about it in the back of my first book, that before I left, I would have one rule, and that I never will photograph anything about the war. Other people, other photographers will be there to do that and tell those stories, and that's all good and well. I have nothing against that. It wasn't my area, and excuse me. And so, still to the day, I never have, and I've actually never seen any of the war films. I saw Deer Hunter. I saw that, and for me, it almost seemed a little bit fake because I saw the real Vietnam through my father's work, slides. So I've never seen Platoon. I've never seen Hamburger Hill. I've still to the day, I've never seen any of them, and so that was my one thing that I've just kept in touch. I just wanted to show how beautiful and deep, rich this country is, and through my own little channel, that I would show people who were working to show what Vietnamese are, who they are. They're not who we learned them in school. Is this, particularly I was living in the North too, that they're the enemy, or it's not. This is just people with culture and deep, deep history. And so I photographed artists, I photographed writers, I photographed farmers, and it was all inside their living and working environments and the landscapes. And hopefully that was my own little piece, own way to help trauma and healing, and people heal from whatever wounds they have on both sides, North Vietnamese, South Vietnamese, and Americans as well. And this photograph here actually represents that, because in 1998, I took part in an exhibition in Washington, D.C., where it was actually 70 Vietnamese artists, and the organizers found my work to use this particular image to represent the art exhibition that was traveling around the United States called The Winding River. And then when they saw the amount, I had been living there already about 7 or 8 years, and they saw the amount of work that I had, which artwork and photography, in the medium of photography, it disappeared during 2 decades during the war, because no one had money to work as an artist, to make artistic work, and any film or photography-based work was all, money went towards documenting the war journalistically. So my whole genre of work just disappeared from Vietnamese culture. So they used some of my work to represent, to going around this traveling exhibition that was the first one going around the United States. And my wife went to the opening. I flew in from Saigon from the opening. We didn't meet, but according to her, this photograph reminded her that that she was Vietnamese, and she had come here when she was 9 and assimilated into American culture, changed her name to Erin, tried to rid her accent to sound American, and worked through school. Going in, she ended up going to GW in D.C., and she was going back and forth to Vietnam all the time. And this photograph, according to her, saw it and really brought her back to her childhood and reminded her that I'm actually Vietnamese, and this was the start of her journey back. And then she had contacted me to work on an exhibition together. We met, and kind of the rest, 3 kids later and 20-something years later, we're...
Aaron, please stand up. Boom, please stand up.
So it's the healing part, and I guess, and of course it's a personal story, and according to her, but that it's proof that, art, film, poetry, writing, this is the soft power of the arts that heals, that transcends over government issues and over policy and trade and so on. I think these are the things that actually move people. It hits people's emotions.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something we talked about when we shared that, the past history, because in many ways, my father was, fought in the Vietnam War. But unlike your father, he did not talk a lot. He was very stoic, never spoke about the war. So my entire knowledge growing up as this, Vietnamese American kid growing up was also through the lens of him. But the difference is I watched all those American films. I watched every single one of them at a way too young of an age. So my entire understanding of Vietnam was through the lens of Deer Hunter, Coming Home, Apocalypse Now, Platoon, all that. So even as a Vietnamese kid, I had this almost this self-hate, you can even call it, before, because the Vietnamese people were only lensed a certain way. And so I saw them only as individuals with black pajamas running around or being shot at or shooting at someone else and going crazy and just talking gibberish. Because all those films, none of them were shot in Vietnam. None of them spoke actual Vietnamese. And the particular your film you're talking about, Deer Hunter, was extremely difficult. Even though it won like 5 Academy Awards and all that, as a piece of cinema, there's some amazing parts to it. But the representation of Vietnamese people was horrific. Something I did not understand until I got older. And I tell this story, in my class and others. But when I was young, when a lot of times kids would play war games, I always got selected to because Vietnam Wars, all that, to be on the Vietnam side, and all the kids in the neighborhood want me to play the Russian roulette scene. For those who've seen the movie, But I just want to ask you one quick thing. You talk about healing, how your photos heal some other people, and all that. What did your father think about all your photos? And did you get a chance to see him? Did you get a chance to talk to him about it? Right?
Yeah, I think it. He hasn't. I mean, he's very proud. He was very, very surprised. Like when I went there, he didn't think I would last 2 months. I originally landed when I was gonna go for only 2 months, and I was just gonna make some black and white prints and make some portraits and landscapes, come back and propose it to galleries, because I'd always wanted to show in galleries as an artist. And when I told them, this is late 92 when I'm planning this, when I'm knowing that I'm going to leave in 93. And if anyone knows about that, the embargo is still in place. We didn't have an embassy. It was very, very different and way behind time. And so he was like, you won't last 3 months. There's this, but I hope you do. I think he was very surprised, and I think the longer my work went on and seeing what I was doing, I think it made him proud, and also it kind of continued on what he had started, giving back humanitarian aid, that he saw the side of me that was trying to heal and help and show people what Vietnam was about, completely opposite of, with no war reference at all. And I think it made him, proud. But I know, stories like yours a lot, and I have so many friends, like people are not friends. I get emails, and my wife knows of this, for all throughout the year, people saying, like, I never grew up with Vietnam. My parents didn't talk about it. I saw your work, or I went to this exhibition here, or I saw your book, and I bought my ticket, or and I did this, and I came back. I went to Vietnam for the first time because of your work. Thank you. And I get these all the time, and it's like it's just extremely satisfying to know people do that, and Westerners, as well as particularly when Vietnamese do it. Growing up like you did, where you didn't get anything, you didn't get any information from it.
When Peter just spoke about, purposely trying to avoid documenting the war. Tell us a little bit about your journey, your process in that, because you do document the war as a backdrop. You add in poetry and proverbs and mythology and music, and so you document the war, but in a different way. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
before I answer your question, I want to address an issue that you raised, with many American movies about Vietnam, where we appear as the background to the Western stories, and Vietnamese people don't have agency, we don't have voices. So I fought against that with my 2 novels. So with The Mountain Sing, I put Vietnamese people on the center of the stories, and we are the people with culture, with pride, with heritage, and I had a lot of fun translating Vietnamese proverbs. So, for example, one of my favorite proverbs is "Mưa dầm thấm lâu." So when I was growing up, my father would sometimes get upset at my 2 brothers and me because we were naughty, and then my mom would say, "Mưa dầm thấm lâu, soft and persistent rain penetrates the earth better than a storm." So if you ever get upset at something, take a deep breath and think about this proverb and become a soft and persistent rain. And I tell that myself all the time. In my second novel, Dust Child, like in so many Hollywood movies about Vietnam, bar girls appear as victims to be rescued by Americans. So in my novel, Dust Child, there are 2 bar girls, and one of them is a poet. And she tries to rescue American soldiers with Vietnamese poetry. And I also, document a lot of elements of Vietnamese culture in it. So, for example, we have in the book club kit of Dust Child, I have a list of all the musical instruments that I mentioned in the book, and also there, Phong, who is a mixed race person, he is a musician, and I want to show his humanity as well, because this book is about mixed race children of American soldiers and Vietnamese women born out of the Vietnam War. And before I researched for this book, I did not know around 100,000 children were born out of the Vietnam War. And and Phong really experienced a lot of discrimination, and he regained his humanity by connecting with nature and with music. And in this paragraph, I talk about about cải lương music, because I grew up in the Mekong Delta in South Vietnam. So we have a traditional form of music called cải lương. I talk about it here, but would you like to hear cải lương?
Yes.
Okay, it's very. I don't sing in Vietnam, but because I'm not a good singer, but I'm here in New York, so why not? So I composed a cải lương song to thank you, the readers. Bạn đọc ơi, hôm nay các bạn đã về đây đoàn tụ. Nhìn những gương mặt thân quen, tôi như thấy mình mắc nợ ân tình. Từ thuở còn thơ tôi đã tự nhủ mình rằng một ngày tôi sẽ viết nên những câu chuyện về quê hương xứ sở. Trong đó có những người như bạn như tôi, họ cũng thênh thang thăm thầm những nụ cười, rồi rơi nước mắt trước tận cùng đau khổ. Bạn đọc ơi, suốt đời tôi mắc nợ những ân tình tôi mãi mãi khắc ghi. Oh my readers, today you gather. Looking at your compassionate faces, I see light, and I see that I owe you ocean of that. For my childhood, I wanted to write about my homeland, about people like you and me. Our lives can be filled with laughter, yet sorrow also brings us tears. Oh, my beloved readers, I owe you until the end of my life. Your compassion I carry with me always.
Wow. Thank you so much. Wow, I was so moved by that. Thank you so much. Yeah, that was really beautiful.
Peter. I won't sing Kylo.
You got it, man. You got it. I wanted to talk a little bit about just the, because, look, I'm an artist, I'm a filmmaker. I want to dissect a little bit about you guys' process, because this is actually really important. And we have, in the audience, a lot of students of history, but also students of the School of the Arts here. And I just want to know a little bit about how you come up with your ideas and which location you go to photograph, and what gets you out of bed to document what you document. And one of the things when we talked that you said was really interesting to me, which I did not know before, is that you don't think of yourself as a photographer. You think of yourself as an explorer. Can you please talk about that?
Sure. Well, this question is kind of it's got a multi-part answer because it's changed throughout the last 32 years of being there in Vietnam. And when I first went, like I explained earlier, I had relied on these visions of these slides of this this faraway land that looked different, had these limestone karsts coming out of the around Da Nang in the center of the country. There's a lot of mountains, and it comes right down in the ocean right there. It's incredibly beautiful, and huge mountains. And then there's an area which many of you have probably heard of, Marble Mountain. And it's in Da Nang as well. And I'd seen photos of those, from my dad. So I envisioned this whole thing, and when this whole body of work of what I would like to imagine Vietnam would look like. And so on my first book, I used my just imagination over decades of thinking about what it would look like and really to recreate that. But as I was so fortunate to be able to live there, I'm learning more and more about the culture and about different parts of the country as I live there, and meeting friends and meeting people throughout different parts of the country also, which Vietnam is it's so diverse, and the people who are in the very far north, their lifestyle and culture is extremely different from where Quế Mai grew up later on in her life when she moved down to the very southern tip in Bac Liêu province in the Mekong Delta. It couldn't be different, couldn't be further different. That's where all it's a completely flat river life, and then in the center of the country, and then different areas as well. So meeting those and getting influences on and learning about the country, it changed throughout my career in getting ideas about projects and so on. So, but the general the general way that I still work today, and this is a great example here. The first one is 95. This is outside in Hoa Binh province, which is west of Hanoi. In fact, I have to give a shout out to Quế Mai, because in her book, The Mountain Sings, she writes about where this area of mountains is where people left when the bombing was happening in Hanoi. And she writes about this in her book, and people go to this part of the country, young kids and so on, and with their families whose fathers are fighting in the war. The mountains that you see in the background there on the left-hand side, those are exactly the places. Like I know where many of the caves are, where people went to. And it's just interesting. We meet later on, and that's one of my favorite places. So I would explore. In these days, I don't ride a motorbike as much as I used to, but throughout the cities I do. But when I go outside, it's in a car. But I still work the same way. I explore, and I research my projects though now, and I continue to go back. But when I get to the area that I'm going to work in, I'm still exploring. And sometimes I back off of research and stay away from it. So I don't want to be too influenced by the research that you can see online so easily these days. I go out and search for it and still try to surprise myself and to and really to try and find things. Yeah.
Just real quick, because when we were talking, you said sometimes you'll go on a motorbike for days and realize there's nothing to capture, and you just go home. And I think for us, for the writers in the room and filmmakers, in a way, it's kind of like, you had an idea, you sit down, this blank piece, sheet of paper to write, you realize you don't have anything to say that day.
Right.
So how do how do you get over that and find something to photograph?
Well, I'm thinking of a specific example where I went out to this province a few times early on. This was the most extreme example, but I had wanted to get to this province because of certain mountains, and I went out there for like over a 3-year period. It was like a 5-hour drive. At that time, it was like a 5-6 hour drive outside of Hanoi. It's on the Chinese border in the northeast, and the province is called Langsan. And I would go out there, and I went to some place. I had a mistake with some film. I made this image. There was a technical issue with the film, and so on. So on all the ink from the paper that was around the film transferred onto the film. So I wasn't able to use that. I was sponsored by a film company at one point, whose name I won't mention, but big mistake happened. So I wanted this photograph, and I went back to this province like 4 or 5 times, and the light's different. It's a different season. It looks completely different, and there was nothing there afterwards, and I ended up just giving up in that case. But other places, I'll go to some place, and I'll just, before I photograph, like sometimes I don't bring my camera, and I just go around, and I look at things, and I listen, and I eat food, and I will drive around the areas just to get a sense and watch people working and get a sense of whatever season it's in. If it's in the summer, it could be blazing hot, and that affects my work, and how I want to show things on film, as it does yours and it does Quế Mai's writing. And other times in winter, it can be completely opposite. But I'll do that just to get a sense of a feeling, and then my mind starts working of how I want things to look, and so on. And that's how I go about that process.
Fantastic, thank you. Quế Mai, I want to ask you the same question. And for me, I'm actually very curious, because I'm such an admirer not only your stories, but how you put the words together, because it's not just storytelling, but the way you put your words together, your sentences, your balance. You did some beautiful poetry work for us this evening. What's your process? And from coming up with your ideas to how do you put your words together, and also how do you decide between doing a narrative piece of fiction or poetry, short form or long form?
Do you know why I write fiction? To cheat my readers into reading my poetry. That's why it took me so long to write my novels. 7 years on The Mountain Sing and 7 years on Dust Child. I mean, I consider my poems, my epic poems. Novels give me a lot of more space to tell stories and to include different characters and different perspectives. And I love to read suspenseful novel and novels which is literary. So I try to achieve that in my writing. So there are 2 types of writers. Some of them plan a lot. They may write, before they write a novel, they will have a synopsis. They will have a chapter per chapter plan. For me, when I start a novel, I just have an idea. I want to have some message that I want to portray, but I want to be surprised. I want to be shocked when I write. I want to have that pleasure, So the endings of both The Mountain Sing and Dust Child shocked me. I was like, what happened? Because, things really can really, I love being creative, because sometimes you get so lost and your mind can take you to unexpected places. And this is what happened with both of my books, because, when I started The Mountain Sing, I wanted to have a grandma and her granddaughter, and I wanted the family to be, a large family with each family member bears witness to a historical event of Vietnam, but I did not know what happened to that family. So in the end, somehow everything came together through a lot of editing, of course, and Betsy saw that.
But in the process of that, so you come up with an idea, like you said, you don't know how it's going to end. So in the process of writing, are you finding the ideas along the way? Do you structure ahead of time? Do you have some idea of where you're going to end? And are you okay with changing your ending? And you give yourself that freedom as well?
I think, I say I don't plan explicitly in writing, but I I do a lot of thinking, you know, because I have zillion of ideas. I mean, if you see my computer, you see so many folders like next book 1, next book 2. I have like next book 25 at the moment. But I think a lot, and I collect material along the way, and I do a lot of real life research as well. For me, you know, the research is not just about collecting information, but it's about collecting the emotions. And so I visit, you know, the physical places. I observe, I listen. For example, I have a chapter in my novel about this soldier who had to walk from North Vietnam to South Vietnam for months through Ho Chi Minh Trail to be able to get to the battlefield. And to get the sense of it, I went to the trail at night without any light, you know, and I was there in darkness, and I wanted to feel that feeling of a young man who had to be there surrounded by the enemy and fearing for his life. So I want, you know, research for me is to have these feelings and to transfer the feelings from the pen onto the pages. And my publisher, Betsy, told me, your job is to make your readers cry. And I mean, to do that, I have to cry in my own tears too. I have to feel compassion for the characters.
Yeah. And in that process, because this is actually really interesting for me, you know, a novel, you know, you have so many pages, you're writing, like you said, you have so many story ideas. But I'm sure in your writing process, let's say The Mountain Sings, you have so many scene ideas. Ultimately, what's your process of actually cutting a scene out? Was there a scene that you were like, oh my God, I really love this, and I just really would like it in the book, but I know it doesn't work, so I have to cut it. So in film, we call it, you know, you have to cut your baby. You know, well, we say you have to kill your babies, right? So you know, in the editing process, you have to be ruthless.
Yes.
Is it the same way for you with your books?
Yes. I have had to kill many characters, taken out my favorite characters, and like put in a folder called the next book that I could use them again. But I think, you know, normally I draft. You know, I don't plan much for the first half of the novel, and when I get a sense of where the story is going, then I do more planning. So it's so I can see, you know, I can envision the whole project. So I think, you know, allowing the imagination to fly is really important, because if you want to be moved, to be able to move the reader.
Absolutely.
I want to touch on something that Quế Mai said as well, that, you know, with artists, we work on feelings. We feel our work to come up with stories, and, you know, there's times where, like, I totally relate to what she said about going onto the trail at nighttime with no lights. And if anyone has been into these areas post-war, maybe some of you were there during, but, you know, where that she's talking about, it's the foliage and the areas that you travel are so dense and absolutely pitch dark. They're humid and hot and filled with, it's difficult, and to get, you know, to get the feeling out into her words is really important. And, you know, I do that actually, like when I go around, in the Mekong Delta was one that the project in my second book, I did the same thing, like went out and I felt what it feels like when it's like 110 degrees with like 99% humidity at noon, you know, and you're standing in the, like, you want to capture that feeling in a photograph, and so you have to translate that somehow, and feeling the areas is so important, as of course both of you know.
Thank you. We're almost we're actually past the time to open up to the audience. So I want to ask you just real quickly, I just want, and then each of you guys answer the same question. You know, your works have been impactful. We talked a lot about the themes of the power of art, healing, purpose. Was there a key moment in each of your lives, and I'll start with you, Peter, and so we can end with Quế Mai, that you felt like transformed your work or transformed you as an artist? One key moment, please.
Yeah. Well, actually, can we go back? Can we go back 2 slides to the one in Namding, in the cathedral? This here. So this is my latest project, but since we're here, I'll talk about this. This is current for me. you know, after I came up with this idea 32 years ago, but I didn't know how to do it. But these cathedrals had just an enormous impact on me. And now that you know, this cathedral here, which I have a side view on it in some other work, it fits about 600 to 800 people inside, and it was torn down about 4 days after I made this photograph. And I had a talk with the priest with it, and you know, of course, we're not arguing. It's his choice to take it down to build something new, but we had just completely different ideas on. You can't take this down, you know. And I said, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna photograph it so it's preserved. And by doing that, and particularly when I found out it went down, it's of course satisfying, but it goes back to my influences where I just documented something that now is gone, you know, and it was up for 200 years, and it, you know, so, and it's built by the French with materials that you don't find anymore, and some of the materials came in from France, the tiles and so on, which they don't exist any longer. So that was one, and then, you know, on the very first project, like this was a key moment for me, because I had envisioned this as a kid to the inside of environments like I spoke about, and this was the first image that I had made, like my first month in Vietnam. And for me to, as a kind of an insecure kid who was starting something, I didn't know how I was going to, you know, start, or I was going to be able to do it. I had a lot of people say, there's no way you'll be able to complete this project. When I made this, it gave me complete confidence of like, I can do this. And as an artist, you know, and we go through these stages of being insecure about a work, can I complete this project? And there's finally the next image is in the 90s, you know, the mid 90s, when I was living in Hanoi and started documenting it, exactly how my influences did in Paris. Or John Thompson, he was a Scottish photographer. He moved to Hong Kong in 1860, and he documented Asia for 25 years. He has the first photographs of Angkor Wat in 1866. And I work with the same cameras that they do, the large format with the bellows over your head. You put the cover over your head, you know, big sheets of film, 8 by 10 inches of film. And these are the cameras that I use. So while I was living there, you just don't see any of this stuff anymore, as you both know. And the cyclos, or there's no cars on the street, there's no stoplights. The street fronts, you know, the houses are different. And so these are the three key moments, but they change throughout, you know, they still keep happening for me.
I would encourage all of you guys to seek out Peter Steinhauer's work. Just like the cathedral, which he documented it, and it was demolished 4 days later. So much of Peter's work is really capturing Vietnam through his transitions, and a lot of what he captured, that Vietnam just doesn't exist anymore. The streets, the buildings, and so, you know, in many ways, you're also a historian with a camera. So it's really beautiful. Wei Mai, I'm going to give you the last word. A key moment that transformed you, or give you or a sense of purpose.
The key moment that transformed my life is to realize that writing could serve a purpose. So, for example, that key moment happened when I was young and I volunteered in orphanages to support victims of Agent Orange. And you see here the newspaper article I wrote for the New York Times on the call for help for millions of victims of Agent Orange in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. And it's horrific that children are still born being deformed. And in this picture, you see Ming, you know, he was born without eyes. And this photo was taken by Philip Jones Griffiths. And his daughter is here in the room. Fanny, where are you?
Oh, wow.
I just want to acknowledge, you know, your father's amazing work. Fanny's father was in Vietnam for many years, and he risked his life during the war, documenting the daily Vietnamese life, and he returned to Vietnam and capturing photos like this, so the world would know and to raise awareness about Vietnam as well. So thank you very much to your family. And you know, to use art for a purpose, I wanted to say that I'm really proud that one of my former students is here, Justin. So I very surprised to me that both of my novels are widely taught at international schools in Vietnam. And I had the honor of visiting Justin's school, and I presented about my second novel, Das Child, children of mixed race children born out of the Vietnam War. And Justin talked to me about it, and after that, she put together a research project. And then she got into Columbia University with that project. Wow. So I would like Justin to talk a little bit about your research project, please.
Well, firstly, thank you so much for having me, Gwen Mai. Isn't she amazing, guys? Can we please give her a round of applause? Thank you. So, correction, I actually met Gwen Mai even before you published Dust Child. I don't know if you remember. Gwen Mai came to my school in Saigon. I grew up in Vietnam, in Ho Chi Minh City. And you had given a talk on Mountain Sing. And at the end, I had asked her a question. I said, hey, you know, I read on your Wikipedia you're doing work on Amer-Asian children and Amer-Asian stories. And I said, you know, I grew up knowing that my father was an Amer-Asian child himself. He was a refugee of war, and in 1984, he was sponsored by the United States government to go to America, to grow up in the Bronx and in New York, and eventually moved back to Vietnam, where I grew up. So you know, I had asked you about your research, and this was way early on, before this work was published, and Gwen Mai was really just such an integral part of inspiring me to take on a wider research project. So firstly, thanks so much for having me and for inspiring me with your work. You're so incredible. But essentially the research that I was doing, and I think this is to say that your work has inspiration that goes beyond generations, is that when I read the work that Gwen Mai was doing, you know, when I researched more in Amer-Asian history, I realized that there's really a lot of healing and reconciliation that can come with studying the past and with studying history. When I learned that you were taking on an Amer-Asian project, I decided, you know, maybe I'll take one on myself. And so this was around my sophomore year of high school. I think I was 15 years old. I went home and I started asking my dad. I said, you know, I'd known you were Amer-Asian. You had an American, you know, father who left before you were born. And that was the extent of my knowledge that I knew. So inspired by you and your work and really the spirit of studying history, throughout my next 2 years of high school, I took on a project to really investigate my father's background. And this started as really just asking questions at dinner tables, doing oral history interviews, to eventually becoming a very expansive academic study in which I really sought to document Amer-Asian stories. And this was a really powerful journey for me. I'm currently a first-year student here at Columbia College. I'm studying East Asian Studies, and taking on, you know, studying Amer-Asian voices and preserving these stories has been such an integral part of not only my academic studies, but also my identity. And so a few key things that I learned by doing my history study was, one, I think everyone should be looking into their past a little bit more. I took the Vietnam War class with Go Hang this year, in which we went back and we studied the Vietnam War, and I was able to present to her class my findings. And essentially, you know, I realized that by going back and doing oral history interviews, by talking about our past, and by sharing them with other people, we learn more about ourselves in a way that can help us move forward as a generation of Vietnamese. Which leads me to my second point, which is that I think that you know, healing from the war through artistry and through research is something that the new generation can definitely take on, and certainly this has been a huge part of my experience here at Columbia University. Had I not taken on this project, maybe I wouldn't feel as Vietnamese as I do today. Fun fact, I didn't know I was Vietnamese until I was 11, frankly. Like, I had grown up in Singapore. I'd always knew that my dad had roots in the Vietnam War, but I grew up in a Chinese-speaking household. My mom is from Hong Kong. I always knew I was part American. And so when I moved to Vietnam when I was 11, and when I started asking these questions when I was 19, I started to realize that, you know, to be Vietnamese is a very strong part of my identity. And now I work towards building these bridges for future generations. So really studying the war, you know, having an appreciation for this artistry has helped me, you know, mend my personal identity, but also gives me a purpose to drive forward in the future artistry and history studies that I do. So just wanted to extend my greatest gratitude. I think Amerasian studies is something that I care deeply about. I ended up doing, I think, around 20 hours of oral histories. I wrote a paper. I'm in the midst of writing a memoir that I think I'll continue to write for the rest of my life. It's in development. I don't know when I'm going to publish it, but I have been writing a memoir just about my father and about his story. And that's something that Quế Mai has been so instrumental in helping me write and to really emotionally process. So really just a huge thank you. And the last thing that I want to leave off on, sorry, Tony, I know we're short on time.
Oh, no, that's great.
Is that I really want to empower the next generation of young Vietnamese, Vietnamese American, Viet Kieu, whatever you want to call it, people from Vietnam to feel a certain, empowerment about identity that I do. Because it's really only through connecting with our past and through research and through having this kind of open dialogue that we can really heal from the past and move forward. And you've inspired me so much through your work to do this as a second generation. This is way in the future. When I have kids, they won't have to deal with the pain that my father went through when he was an Amerasian growing up in Saigon and all the trauma that he went through. And it's really thanks to the art of Peter, of Tony, and of Quế Mai that I, as second generation, can do this. So truly, thank you so much.
Thank you, Justine.
She is so amazing. And I can't wait to read your memoir. Wow, thank you so much.
I just want to say real quick, I had the pleasure of listening to Justine's actual life story when she guest lectured for Professor Hung's class, and I learned about her father, and I actually cried during Justine's guest lecture. It's that powerful and moving, so I cannot wait for you to write your memoir, and we're going to have to invite you back a few years from now and give a talk. Yeah, absolutely. But thank you so much. This has been incredibly illuminating. I know that, I don't want to take up too much time, or any more time, actually, because I want to open it up to the audience. So please, anyone who would like to ask a question, we have mics on both sides. Yeah.
Do you want to start here or there? It doesn't.
Yeah, go ahead. So we go ahead and ask your question. And because of our timing, we have to answer briefly, unfortunately. But I want to say, after this, there'll be a book signing with both Quế Mai's new book and Peter's new book out in the foyer over here, and a second book. I'm sorry, and all of Quế Mai's books will be be available to purchase and sign as well. So you can ask more questions for them out in the foyer as well.
Okay. I'm Lucy. I'm a global studies and econ double major. I just want to say, Quế Mai, I'm such a huge admirer of your work. So how did you feel your poetry changed when you moved to the United States from Vietnam, either like stylistically or in terms of personal purpose? And how does seeing the world as a poet inform your immigration experience and your broader identity? Thank you.
Thank you so much for your amazing question. I think, I have grown a lot through my writing journey. My very first poems were about personal issues. I wrote a lot of love poems in my first collection. And in my last collection, there are still love poetry, but more about issues that impact the human race, that I use poetry for advocacy. So I'm still learning a lot every day. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Go ahead. Thank you.
Dalko, thank you so much for being here. I'm so honored to meet you. I'm actually a really huge fan of your work. And for those of you who haven't read The Mountain Sings, you met your goal. You made me cry. It is such a beautiful story of a grandmother and her granddaughter. And it gave me so much more pride for being what it means to be a strong Vietnamese woman. My question to you is, how do you resonate with the characters in that novel? And which one do you resonate with the most? If there are any differences, what are they?
Thank you so much for your kind words. Characters are like children, so you can't say which one is your favorite. But I set out to want to do horrible things to a character called Wicked Ghost, someone who killed the mother of grandmother Diệu Lan. And this is a character that I formed from real life because my own grandmother was killed in the Great Hunger of 1945 by someone who tied her to the corn plants when she was trying to steal corns to bring home to my father and my aunt because they were starving. And I wanted to do terrible things to Wicked Ghost. I wanted to kill him. I wanted to do revenge because this is what you can do with fiction. But then in the end, I found forgiveness instead. I feel that with forgiveness, we can transform our world. We can build peace. If there's forgiveness, there's more human compassion. And I hope I live long enough to see our world at peace. And we realize that we're all children of Mother Earth and we love each other rather than kill each other like we are doing today.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Callisto. I'm an undergrad here, and the question I wanted to ask is, both of you have touched on the importance of feeling and working with feelings as an artist, and I wondered if there are any feelings that you struggle to articulate or ones that you haven't felt like you've been able to dive into yet. What has stopped you, or what keeps you pushing when it's really hard to articulate a certain feeling?
Feelings are, like I said before, feelings are so important to our writing. But if you are too overwhelmed, then it's not good. It's too emotional. So for me, to process the feeling in a way that it can be controlled is also important. And sometimes when I express my feelings in English, it's a bit difficult because I learned English quite late in my life. So I want to give an example of how writing in two languages helps me. So for anyone who knows two languages, write in both because it's really helpful. So there's a scene in The Mountain Sing, that was so emotional for me. And when I wrote in English, I felt it didn't capture exactly how I felt. So I started writing, and then I worked on the scenes for so many days. And one day I left everything and I started writing that scene in Vietnamese. And I started with the word anh ơi, beloved. And it brought out so much emotions in me, and I wrote in a while. So when the emotions were ripe, then I switched to English. So writing in both languages is a lot of fun.
Thank you.
I think just to touch on that, I dealt with that early on in my career, just trying to find my voice and trying to find my vision, what I wanted my work to actually look like, because I'm not working with words. It's what the end photograph actually looks like, the print, what the print would look like. And to come up transfer what I felt up here onto the final print. Early on in my career, I struggled with getting that feeling apart, just because I was trying to find my own vision.
For the sake of time, we're going to do two more quick questions. I'm sorry. And then the two guest speakers will be out in the front to answer more questions. Go ahead. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sydney. I was wondering, both of you were talking about the recurring theme of motorbikes during your experience making this art. How would you say this mode of transportation influences the way that your art is created? And also, how does that represent Vietnamese culture and your experiences there?
So motorbiking is the most common form of transportation in Vietnam. And it's wonderful to be on a motorbike because you are part of life. You have the wind against your ear. You can, in Vietnam, you can smell all the seasons around you. You can smell the food and listen to street sellers. So all of these scenes and landscapes come into the writing more naturally. So when I'm in a car here, I always open the window.
This is such Vietnam is motorbikes. Motorbikes are Vietnam. The sound of the horns, little beeping sounds of horns. It's not honking at someone else as what Westerners would think of. It's actually just to let you know, hey, I'm right behind your wheel here. Just be careful. Don't make a hard right turn. Or I'm right behind you. And, and then when you hear a long, that's when you know, you're doing something wrong. Or, but that is such a massive part of Vietnam.
In fact, because now we have a lot more cars and
Yes.
streetlights and all that, it's actually gotten quieter, and it's very odd.
Yes.
Yes, last question. I'm sorry. We'll take more out there.
Hi, my name is Artemis. I'm a student of Professor Bui and Professor Hong, and I study history at Columbia. And both of your art is incredibly moving. I really appreciated being able to see it. And you've both mentioned you came to understand Vietnam and your place within Vietnam's history better over time. And I was wondering, how has the process of making art changed as your understanding of Vietnam and your understanding of yourself has changed?
Thank you for that's a big question. On my side, this is a very long answer that I won't be able to answer in this short amount of time, but I'm going from film into what now is digital. I don't use film anymore. There's a on that, to answer that, there's just a huge amount of change for me on how I create and how technology has changed, how life has changed, and so on. So, yeah, it's a little bit too much for me to explain everything in my side of work, but I'm sure maybe it is, or maybe it isn't with you.
I think in writing about the history of Vietnam and in researching about it, I feel like I became a better daughter to my parents, because they have been so traumatized by so many different events, and they didn't tell me. So when I became a writer, I knew what questions to ask. I became a better listener. So I felt like, I become a better daughter, and I'm still learning every day from them. For example, suddenly, when I talk about something and they told me something I have never, I didn't know before. So there's, Vietnamese history is so complex, and there's still so much to learn.
Thank you so much. I just want to end by saying, it's a huge honor to have you both here. And I mean this at the bottom of my heart. Speaking of I feel like I'm a better human being reading your books and looking at your photographs, and I truly mean that. Thank you so much for coming to Columbia, and please come together, give a round of applause for Quế Mai and Peter Steinhauer. Thank you so much. Thank you.